be now put.
I'm going to call Sue Kedgley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, in this section, there is on page 33 in Schedule 10, there is a whole section on the long-term plans and what are the sorts of things that a long-term plan must clearly identify. And it talks about all the assumptions of a local authority concerning the useful life of significant assets, about the replacement of significant assets, and etc., etc. But the extraordinary thing is, while it will have to, the long-term plan will have to do the sorts of things that are spelled out in Clause 18, what it will no longer have to do is to spell out to the community whether a council intends to divest itself of strategic assets or including divesting itself...
Point of order. Point of order. The Honourable John Carter.
Mr Speaker, I just wanted to... I listened to the member because I assumed that she was going to bring Clause 18 into the relevance of the part that we're debating, which is Part 2 and 3, Part 2 in the schedules. But actually Part 18, Section 18 that she keeps referring to is in Part 1, and it is not part of the debate. We are talking about transitional issues relating to our long-term plans, but I just think it's outside of the scope of the debate.
Thank you, Member. I just asked the member, we are, as I've indicated earlier, Part 2, Schedules 2 and 3.
And in this section, we are talking about long-term plans and we are talking about transitional provisions for long-term plans. And my point that I was making is that the long-term plans are required to do all sorts of things, but what they are not required to do is to inform the community when a council intends to divest itself of key strategic assets anymore. Until now there has been a requirement that councils have to alert people in their long-term plan that they intend to divest themselves of key strategic assets such as water, the ownership of water. But now, under this section, under the long-term plan, they do not have to inform New Zealanders. Now, I don't believe most New Zealanders will believe. They will not believe that there is no longer a requirement. As a result of this legislation and this section of the bill, there is no longer a requirement to inform communities, to consult with communities when they intend to do something as fundamental as get rid of the ownership of water supplies which have been built up by generations of New Zealanders and which will now be able to be handed over, in fact owned by multinational corporations for a period of 35 years, and this will not have to be mentioned in a long-term community plan. I honestly don't believe that New Zealanders will believe that that the government could be doing this, that the government would think that it would be acceptable to sell off, to allow to a private corporation to sell off water assets, but any other assets as well, without requiring this to be mentioned in a long-term community plan, or actually any other plan, because what the real thing that this bill does is gut the consultation requirements of local government, so now they won't have all the nuisance, the irritation of having to consult with the community when they intend to divest themselves of key infrastructure such as water. And I noticed a bit more squawking from the opposition. Oh no, it's not selling water. Look, I'm afraid to say that allowing a private corporation to own a water supply for 35 years is water privatisation by any other name, and I don't know why the National Party keeps trying to object.
Order.
Yeah, but I'm only responding to the interruptions that I am receiving from the members of the National Party.
Order. I bring the member back. The long-term plans are Part 1, We're on part 2 in the schedules. Please confine your comments to that. Sue Kedgley.
The transitional provisions in Part 2, the consequential amendments and transitional provisions which are outlined in Part 2 also refer to transitional provisions for the long-term plan. And that is what I am addressing, Mr Speaker. It is here on clause 49 on page 22. And as I was responding to my colleagues in the National Party, they've got some idea that the public are going to be deluded into thinking that handing over the control and the ownership of a water supply for 35 years is not water privatisation. Mr Speaker, New Zealanders will not be fooled. They know that handing over the ownership of a water supply that has been built up over generations, handing it over for 35 long years, 11 and a half electoral cycles, that amounts to privatisation, and they're wringing their hands and shaking their heads. That's the truth.